Good morning, everyone. We wanted to take an opportunity to share with you some of our learnings from a conference or a workshop that we attended last week through the Tri-States Consortium, which we are a member of. This is Michelle Gosh.
Hi, I'm Danielle Sullivan.
And Valerie Henning-Piedmont.
And John Krauskoff.
So to begin, maybe we could start with talking a little bit about Heidi Hayes Jacobs and the work that she has done. So I know Heidi from her work with curriculum, but it seems as though over the years she's enhanced that a bit.
She has, and it was exciting to attend the conference. And this is like the second really awesome conference that Tri-States organized in the last year. I think it was the last one that we were at was over the summer, and it was it the summer, Danielle? It was you,
it was the
Nikki,
end
John,
of the school year last year,
and it was another powerful one, which again also resonates the same message of how should schools be thinking about structuring learning environments that prepare children for life outside of the school district when they enter the world of work, college, and just living in general. So it was really an interesting way to think about Heidi outside of the work, as you said, Michelle, that's traditionally been the work of curriculum mapping.
You know, Valerie, in thinking about that difference and that shift, she did have a broad coverage, and she brought some interesting points. One that really resonated with me was they were speaking about accountability, and for years we've heard of accountability as something that's done to us. But she turned that on its head and said that it suggested that we should hold ourselves accountable for innovation rather than for compliance. And as leaders, I think that's an important takeaway, that we're in the position to make change, to lead change, and we have a wonderful team that's executing the change. But rather than leading it toward compliance, actually holding ourselves accountable for the innovation that takes place.
And part of what I liked about the way that she framed that and helped us kind of create almost a staircase to that innovation was through the three ways that she classified pedagogy. Danielle, I liked how you organized that. Do you want to speak a little bit to what she said?
Sure. And I also like the pedagogy because it applied to not only the teacher-student relationship, but the school leader, the district leader, teacher-student relationship as well. So she categorized student engagement into three categories: antiquated, classical, and contemporary. And contemporary is where the innovation is. This is where we want to shift towards. But the antiquated is, she described as a student-teacher relationship as the receptacle-dispenser relationship, where it was teacher speaks, student listens. And then the second category is classical, and these are practices that we do want to keep. These are timeless. These really center around fostering relationships and caring for our students. But the third component is turning our students, in teachers and leaders, into contemporary learners. And some of the ways that she described what a contemporary learner looks like, she used words like self-navigator, which I think is just the most broad. It's applicable to everyone. Professional learner, mindful citizen, global ambassador, innovative designer. And she also said that leaders, students, and teachers have roles in this, fostering this type of environment. And I just think that these characteristics of the contemporary learner really fit the skills needed for the 21st century. Whatever we're preparing our students for, and we don't even know yet what we're preparing them for, sending our students off with these skills, they're prepared.
And that's so important because it's, we have to, I think the message that really resonated with me, which again is the conversation that we've been having around our strategic coherence plan, which articulates the cross-cutting skills that, again, young people need for life, learning, and work. But she also talked about it from the standpoint of how do we transition youngsters into their future? How do we transition to these contemporary learning environments? I mean, it was the other thing that really struck me in her presentation is she talked a lot about learning environment. So in our work around Ed Leader, the Ed Leader 21 work that we did over the summer with Ken Kay during our ADCO session, the 5 areas that were identified in that body of work was how does a system look at curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional learning, and the learning environment when it comes to shifting to a different set of expectations for learners. And I think that message was very much embedded in what Heidi presented, and the fact that she spent a lot of time, strangely so, and I don't say strangely so in a wrong way, but strangely so from someone whose background has primarily been curriculum, focusing on the curriculum work, but now she's really shifted in looking at the learning environment, which I thought was so amazing and was so, inspiring to see.
Yeah, one of the things that I found striking was not just the fact that the modern learning environments really need to be shaped to foster a sense of learning, but she included things such as the vertical look of the room. Some students are higher, some are lower. In some cases, she had steps, and the different sizes of the artifacts that are used. There were so many different ones, but in the elementary school, even the difference between a 3rd grade and a 5th grade environment. And I found that interesting because we tend to walk into a standard cookie cutter room, which has been the traditional piece. But I also found it interesting that she referred to maker spaces as becoming that token space for innovation.
I thought that was important too.
It was, but I think her follow-up to that, where she started to talk about integrating maker spaces into classrooms, is what we've started to do here in several different areas. And we're seeing, we're taking a close look at how students respond to that. So rather than having, as in the past, we had a computer lab and students would go to that special place to do computing, we know that any place can be a maker space. So we're seeing that now in the English classrooms. In English classroom, we're seeing it with Project Lead the Way in both the high school and in the middle school. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes the actual learning that takes place, how that modern learning environment really fosters the learning.
But you know what, John? Even we have innovative spaces at one of our elementary schools that evolved before the Project Lead the Way work. I mean, there were 2 teachers who really had already implemented the sentiments of this message of creating it in your own classroom. There's 2 very creative teachers, JFK, Sarah DiDio and Lynn Olson, who spent some time thinking about and learning about maker spaces in this very way in which Heidi Hayes Jacobs talked about it, where it isn't an exterior space where you might children might get a chance to go to or not, but that is it. You're always in it. You're in it. As a student, as a learner, you're having an opportunity to innovate, create, to collaborate, to revise, to fail, all the things that students need in order for them to function in this era of innovation.
You raise a great point, and I remember seeing in Sarah's room, for example, the recording studio where students can have multiple iterations. It's fantastic, and so even with our youngest, it's not necessarily a dedicated room; it becomes part of the practice, and then the room facilitates that.
That failure is built in because you do have an opportunity when you're in that little studio with the curtain.
Do it again,
and it's okay, and you're expected to do it again.
Absolutely.
So in addition to space, which is one of the ways that she kind of not instructed us, but suggested that we look at some of the constructs that we have, there were three other ways that she mentioned that we might create these innovators, and those were time, grouping, and personnel. So, the time piece reminded me of the work that's being done, especially at the high school, in looking at that really precious resource and figuring out how best to maximize the time so that we can get the most out of our students and out of our professionals.
Yes, we're definitely looking at ways to change our schedule. And I love the way that she really encourages you to you don't have to follow that very structured everyday routine. You can really design your time around what our students need to learn, what they want to learn. How can they be most engaged and excited to come to school? And so we're looking at a lot of different ways to restructure our time, including, longer periods, shorter periods, different day schedules, which would really allow the teachers to develop and implement amazing courses that the students would get excited about and be completely passionate about, and allow them to create and innovate and really just be that lifelong learner. And so I think the time piece is so crucial. She made I like the way that she included that into one of the structures.
And what else, Danielle, that complements the conversation about time is the notion of student groupings. Because she talked a lot about, that we need to focus on kind of like what's the goal? What do we want students, what experiences do we want students to have? And along with time are also considerations about what types of groups, or how do we think about groups, or how students work together. I love the idea that she referred to, field trips as being field studies, for example, as one of those more a fresher way of thinking about that. She talked a lot about project-based learning as the structure for what students do. That really also changes this notion that it is a product at the end of a quarter or a semester, but that these enduring opportunities for children to explore interesting ideas or passions around content areas, or the example that she showed of this project in New York City where children, it was a social problem, around children being rowdy in the bodegas, and how this group of students, through a project-based learning opportunity, actually did some research on the bodegos, and they ended up learning, from the store owners and also building a bridge or better relationship. So contemporary issues, getting children interested in the community that they're in, is so important, and all of these pieces are connected. So that it's a very exciting vision for learning.
Well, that part with the stores as well, and the students getting involved, it was interesting to hear how she described the adults in the community. So we think of our school community, but we're part of a larger community, and that the adults were impressed that the students would greet the store owner by name, and the store owner got to know the students' names. And it's striking that when you know someone, it's very difficult to insult them. It's very difficult to put a label on them, because they're a human being. And I think those relationships and understanding what it means to be a community member, as you described, that's priceless. And yet it's embedded in their learning, and they take charge of it. It reminds me of one phrase that when she was speaking about things, that students don't go to a department, right? They go to a school, and yet when they get there, they travel to these departments, seeing that innovative work where they're breaking out of that and they're doing something that's authentic. We know that that's the things they'll remember as they move forward, and very valuable things indeed.
Exactly. She talked about the certain groupings or ways in which students can operate in their content departments, or content areas, which could be what she categorized as vertical or K-12 extended department meetings. And this is for the adults, but then what the structures that adults create are also structures that students have to inhabit and develop ways in which they learn and grow there. But there are those other kinds of configurations I think are very important as we think about these, the goals for preparing children to live, work and learn in this innovation era that is going to be ever changing, and changing in ways where flexibility and adaptability are going to be critical. So, and I think another important message that I gleaned from her time with us was that these changes are just as important for adults. I've said, we are not as spectators in any of the work around a strategic coherence plan, that the adults, have to also think of themselves as learners and how they can help. I mean, how they see themselves, in this work, and that we're not, outside of it. We're very much inside of it. So these structures too of how professionals within schools has to change in order for students to have opportunities to function differently than how we functioned when we were in our own middles and high schools.
Well, along those lines, Danielle, you had mentioned restructuring time, and Michelle, you referenced that as our most precious resource, I believe. You started to explain some of the modularity, I guess, if that's even a word, how you're moving to a different...
I like how it sounds.
It sounds good. So that you're creating modules, but with different length of time. And I guess that recognizes that some things you do need block scheduling or extended time for. Others might not need as much time. And that certainly will shape things. Could you just speak to that a little bit? Because it reminds me of something I heard from Clayton Christensen, who spoke about higher education and how it's innovating and needs to innovate and reinvent itself. And one of the things was that rather than having all the best in one area, that you can use modules from other schools. And I think that is largely where you're going, but with content. Could you just describe that briefly?
Sure. One of the I'll give you an example. So one of the scheduling or time ideas that we had was to give students a time during the day where they have time to eat their lunch, but then they can actually self-navigate and pursue a course or a class or just an idea that they're passionate about, that they want to learn more about. And they can pick and choose. They actually have the choice to do this. And it doesn't have to be for the entire semester or the entire marking period. It can be a 2 or a 3 week course, mini course study. And one of the examples I know, John, Valerie, you had mentioned about how can we make Mott Hall a better place where the students got out into the community. Another example that would be perfect for this was the study that Heidi spoke about with Union Station. They were learning about measurement, but it kind of took them to this entire problem. Why are these trains so late? So they did a complete study on the entire infrastructure of the train systems in other countries. And what this all really lends itself to is really becoming literate, but not in the traditional sense. And she talked about now the literacies now are digital, global, and media. Those are the important literacies. And I think that giving our students opportunities such as the different schedules and giving them choices to pursue really fosters the literacy that they're going to need and really fosters global citizenship.
So you had referenced earlier those 3 items to consider, and one you mentioned was you had mentioned antiquated, classical, and contemporary. So in order to make room for this, sounds like the contemporary, where you're actually creating new ideas and opportunities. Did the school in their planning need to go through and look what they could take out, what was antiquated,
Absolutely.
or were we able to work within the existing structure?
Both. Believe it or not, we are able to, and it's still a work in progress. This is something that we're developing right now. We did. And we know we have to take out certain antiquated practices and even courses. So by taking those out, it really lent itself to opening opportunities to implement those contemporary. I even say contemporary courses because these are courses that are directly linked to applying and transferring knowledge and skills for our students.
Is there any thinking in your planning at the high school about having children design courses?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've been actually surveying the students. We've been doing needs assessments. A lot of teachers have been doing it within the departments, within their own classes, and some of them teach 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. So we're getting a great idea of what the students want.
That's so awesome.
What they want to learn, what they're excited about. And so, and it really goes back to, I loved the way Heidi had an empty chair at her presentation, and she said, I always have an empty chair here because it reminds me that everything I do is for the student.
Exactly.
And she even gave the empty chair a name of a student. And so she said, and it keeps me it keeps me focused on making sure. So I think being able to get the ideas from the students that they're excited about will help us develop and implement a better schedule. And I think we modeled it with the Superintendent's Conference Day that Ms. Gosh put together, where teachers, faculty, and staff administrators presented, and everybody got to choose where they wanted to go, what they wanted to learn about, what they were excited about. And it really was such a successful day. And
it was.
I think by us modeling that and experiencing that, there was a great deal of learning that went on, and I think we're better equipped now to implement this.
So that sounds very much like what Dr. Henning was saying with regard to we need to be active in that. Michelle, could you talk a little bit about the that? What I keep hearing about it, and there was very positive response. Could you just speak to the what went in behind the scenes? Because I believe that was requested, as you're saying, Danielle, the students are actually requesting courses or areas of study. I believe that came from the teachers. Am I?
It did, and that day was a long time in process. There were results of our professional development survey last year where teachers asked for more to tap internal expertise a little bit more, and we met as a professional learning team, and we put together a survey of what teachers would be willing to teach. All the teachers volunteered their time in order, and administrators volunteered the prep time in order to put this together. So the response was overwhelming, and I think it's just one of the great examples of the community of Brewster, and how we pulled together. But in addition to that conference day, there's a lot of this investment in personnel, which is the last piece that Heidi talked about. And through the book talks that we're doing across the system, through the strategic team that has met a few times and will help us figure out the path moving forward, and really just the recognition of our internal experts, I think is a huge step forward, and really what we want to do and what we value here.
Absolutely. And I think another really important part of this, because again, I can't emphasize enough how we, the leaders and teachers, have to also shift our thinking about our roles. And I love the way that Heidi categorized, there was a slide, our leaders need contemporary teachers, our learners need contemporary teachers and leaders who are literate self-navigators. So this is what we have to do. Literate self-navigators, professional learners, social contractors, savvy media makers, global ambassadors, mindful citizens, and innovative designers. I think that's a study in and of itself. What does a leader and a teacher need to do in order for us to reshape ourselves around these sort of attributes that we're going to need in order for us to successfully lead this work. And it is, I think it is heavy lifting, when we're, really still kind of reeling from the last 5 or 6 years in New York State, where people have, some real feelings. And also probably even for some of our, for our entire careers, we've been, thinking about content in 1890s ways, the way that, and most likely to succeed, that the first chapter talks about the presence of the Committee of 10 met in 1893 is still present in 2016. And so we have a lot of work to do, and I think, we really have to pay attention to ourselves as we, impose an image that is ambitious for our children, but we don't have a choice, because if we don't, they're going to be ill-equipped to do, to function not only as learners, and they're going to have to be learners for the rest of their lives, but also for work. Even if they don't pursue a 4-year college, there's an expectation that you have to be able to solve problems, be a critical thinker, great communicator and collaborator, and be resilient, flexible, persevere, be a good citizen, both in that community that you're working in as well as the larger society. And that that's not a small thing. So for me, at least, I'm humbled by the notion that this is our goal, because it's a pretty lofty one, and one that, again, is the only one that I can see us pursuing.
You know, it's interesting that it's not just schools, right? We're talking about lifelong learning, and just last night, I had a colleague who shared with me that IBM's CEO had sent a letter to our president-elect regarding how we can work. She refers to it as new-collar jobs as opposed to blue-collar jobs.
New collar.
And I mean, you could take a look online and search for, IBM's CEO.
IBM.
Yeah, and the idea was that schools may be actually 6 years of high school, for example, but when a student leaves, they have basically learned a trade, they've learned IT skills. She speaks to the need for cybersecurity and references that in many of their locations, they hire quite a number of people who don't have a formal college degree, but are specialists. And again, that modular learning, that they may not have the degree, but they have the specialty. So we're seeing that now even in conversations with high-level leaders in our country that are looking for ways to really leverage some of the work we're doing, and that will really be encouraging. It endorses the need and the urgency of this work.
So that's a good wrap up.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to sit, Dr. Heading.
Well, thank you, Mr. Grosskopf, Ms. Gosh, Ms. Sullivan.
It's a great way to start the day.
Absolutely.
Terrific.